from Young and Savvy Genealogists, and today I want to talk about 10 source citations that everyone needs to know. Recently, I've been getting into learning how to do source citations, and since I learn best by teaching other people, I decided to make a presentation on source citations to really start myself on developing the habit to use them. And so hopefully by watching this, you'll learn a little bit better how you can use source citations in your research, and that it'll be an easier process for you because of the way that we've talked about on how to simplify it. And so the first thing to keep in mind is that citing sources isn't hard. Citing your sources is only hard if you're going about it in the wrong way. And the first way in which that comes about is if you have the right materials or not. And the most important material that you can have to learn how to do source citations is Evidence Explained by Elizabeth Shown Mills. So you have a couple of options in how you can go about obtaining it. You can buy it from her website, and if you're going to buy it, I would highly recommend buying it directly from her website, not just because she sees the royalties from that, but because as I've searched around on the internet through other sellers, I've never been able to find it any cheaper than the price for which she's selling it. The hardback copy of the book will set you back about $50, and the digital copy, which is a digital PDF, will set you back about $30. However, be sure that you read the directions very carefully before you actually go to download the digital copy. I've read many complaints from people that have tried to download it that they didn't know exactly what they were doing. They assumed that it would just be a straightforward process, and then they ended up using all 4 of their downloads and not actually getting a copy of the book. So if you don't want to buy it but you still want to use it, probably your best bet is to try and find it in a library. Go to worldcat.org to check out the library listings in your area to see if they have a copy close to you. The copy that I ended up using and making some copies from was at a local university here in Boise, but it's non-circulating, so I can't take it home with me. I can only use it there, but since that place is within 5 miles of my house, it doesn't really bother me. Once you get a copy of Evidence Explained and you're able to use it, the next thing that you have to focus on is knowing how to use it. And I think this is what stops a lot of genealogy people in their tracks. Even after they buy this book, it's a huge resource. It's over 1.5 inches thick, over 1,000 pages, and so it becomes very difficult to know how best to use it. There are some gray pages in it that kind of break up the chapters. Those are quick reference guides, and they give you kind of exactly what it sounds like, a quick look at some source citations to give you an idea on how best to format them. But even then, knowing which one to use can still be a challenge. So we're going to talk about a basic process that you can go through in order to decide which source citation is the best one for you to use. In terms of breaking down the record, choosing the citation, and then how to put them best where they go. But before we can talk about that, we have to talk about an important fact of life, in that for the same record, there are different source citations in Evidence Explained that will apply to that record. Okay, so I can have 2 copies of the 1940 census in front of me, and depending upon where and how I obtain them, there can be 2 completely different source citations for that. Okay, so you are trying to cite the source that you are looking at or that you looked at personally. All right, so your source citation should be a reflection of what it is that you saw. And being able to identify which source citation best represents that and what the difference between them are, that becomes the challenge. Be asking yourself the question, what am I seeing? And be specific. Don't just say it's a copy of the 1940 census. Where did you get that copy of the 1940 census? Did you get it from a historical society? Did you get it from a book? From a CD? From the internet? Where on the internet did you get it? Did you get it from an online database? Did you get it from a state archive? Each one of those things is going to change the source citation that you would create for that record. And so develop the habit of analyzing your documentation more carefully. Look exactly at what the document is supposed to be, not what we would, in a quick moment, decide that it is. Good example of that was when I was doing research at my aunt's house. Someone had gone along and gotten a lot of birth and death certificates and things like that. And as I was looking at them, it's like, oh, this is a birth certificate, this is a death certificate. And I didn't really look all that closely at what it was that I was seeing until much later, when I realized that the birth certificates that I was looking at, they were actually delayed birth certificates, which is a little bit different. Okay, so if I wasn't very careful and I just picked the first source citation that looked like it would work for me, like a birth certificate, I would end up creating a source citation that wasn't entirely accurate for the record that I had. And if someone came behind me and tried to recreate the steps that I took to get that record, they wouldn't be able to do it. And so just make sure that you're analyzing your documents carefully before you cite them, so you cite them properly using the right citation. There are 3 key elements for every source that will help you choose the right citation. Okay? And to kind of outline that with an example from my own research, my family comes from Pittsylvania County in Virginia, and the county seat in Pittsylvania County is Chatham. The Chatham records all exist in the clerk of the court's office in the courthouse in the city of Chatham. Accessing them can be a little bit challenging if you don't live in the area. What I discovered after I had already gone on my research trip to Chatham was that there were microfilm copies of a good portion of those records in the Library of Virginia in Richmond. Okay, so let's assume that I went to Chatham, which I did, and let's assume that I also went to the Library of Virginia, made 2 copies of the same exact records in a Chatham Book of Deeds. Okay, so let's say I made a copy out of a deed book from the clerk of the court's office in Chatham, and then I made a copy of the same exact record in Richmond. How I would cite those sources is completely different. Okay, so think about if I were to go into the clerk of the court's office and I needed to get access to that record again. All right, the Chatham deeds are in a book. All right, so I already know that I need a source citation that will not only be a book citation, but will be a book citation for court records. So I already know that that's the section of evidence explained that I need to go to. But if I were to go to Richmond to try and access those same exact records, I know, because I've looked through the collection, that the Chatham deeds are on microfilm, all right, which means that the source citation that I need for those records is actually based on format, all right? I need the microfilm. So this is an example of how format is going to fundamentally change the citation that you're going to make. And along with format, there are two other aspects that could also change your source citation like that. And it's the record type and geographic location. And so when you're trying to choose a source citation, you need to use the citation that best demonstrates how you would access that collection again. So once you've decided what information in the citation is most important, it becomes easier to choose the citation format that best represents that information. So you want to pick a citation, and when you open up Evidence Explained, you're going to see that, at least in the gray quick source areas, which is largely what this presentation is going to focus on, they're already laid out exactly the way that you need to cite them. So all you have to do is fill in the blanks with the information from your record, and you're going to note that on these quick guides, these gray sheets inside of Evidence Explained, there are 3 different citations on every page. Okay? And it's not saying that there are 3 different ways to sort this citation. It's that each one of those citations serves a different purpose. Okay, so the first one on that page is a source list entry. The second is the first or full reference. And the last one is the short reference. The source list entry goes in your bibliography. Okay, and so if you are especially publishing something as a paper or in a journal, you're going to want a source list. The first full reference note is what goes into the footnotes of your paper. So let's say you were writing a paper, you're on a page, and you reference the 1940 census for somebody. At the end of that sentence, you put the little number superscript, and then at the bottom of that page, there's this corresponding note that goes along with that. The first time you reference a source, you use the full reference note citation, which is the one in the middle of the gray page. The last one on the page, the short reference note, every time that you reference that same source afterwards, you don't have to put the long full citation again. You can use the short reference to save space. And then in terms of what you do with those source citations, you put them where they go. All right? And where should you be putting your source citations? Is it only for if you're writing a paper or if you're going to publish? No. Source citations are usable in every aspect of genealogy. So even if you're writing a blog, source citations will make your blog entries better. If you are creating binders and storing all of your information in binders, it'll make your own little private library of images and printouts, it'll make it better. And so your source citations should be on every paper, on every file, in every image, in every tree, on every website, forum, on every copy that you have, including finding an appropriate way to put them together with original documents. Okay, so I'm not suggesting that on the back of a really fragile document or inside of the family Bible that you want to write a source citation. That's not what I'm saying. But you want to find a way to put the source citation together with your documentation in such a way that they can't be separated. Okay? And there's certain ways that you can do that. If you keep the family Bible inside of an archival box, just put the citation on top of the lid or on the inside of the lid somewhere where that source citation is clearly visible. All right? And there is a resource by the Board of Certification for Genealogists, the board that certifies professional genealogists. They have a book called Genealogy Standards, and these are the standards, the operating standards for every professional genealogist. This is the standard that they should be striving to uphold. These are the habits that are most going to help you. And it says, when transmitting or storing documented material, genealogists prevent mechanical or digital separation of citations from the statements, facts, images, and conclusions they document. So some of the recommendations that they use in how to do that is you can right-click on your images and put the source citations in the metadata. You can write them out on photocopies or keep like a master source list and just copy those citations onto your digital copies every time you do them. You can use them on footnotes, on blog posts. You can make source lists. However it is that you best want to go about doing that is up to you, but just make sure that this is a part of your archival process in the stuff that you are collecting. And there are 10 source citations that I think everyone should be able to do. These are the bread and butter of most of the research that we do. There are many, 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 many more source citations than these, but these are probably the 10 that you use most commonly. And so these are the ones that I wanted to emphasize in my presentation, and they'll go more or less in that order. And for this presentation, all of the citations that you're going to be seeing are the ones for the first full reference note. I chose those because they include the most information in terms of being able to access that record again. So I thought those would be the most helpful to analyze, and you can follow the same type of process with the other two types of citations there. The first slide here is for vital statistics. And so for birth, marriage, and death, these are kind of all encompassed into one. And keep in mind that these are only for the certificates. Okay, so for birth registers or indexes or delayed birth certificates or other variations of the birth records that you can find, this citation is not for those. If you want to see those types of citations, you need to go to Evidence Explained and look through pages 426 through 428, and they'll show you some of the other variations. But these particular this set of 6 right here is only for standard vital statistics certificates. So birth certificate, death certificate, marriage certificate. It's only for those. And you want to put everything in there exactly in this order. So starting with the jurisdiction, county, comma, state, comma. Put the certificate number or the certificate type. Right, so if you look at the examples over on the left-hand side, you'll see Pennsylvania County, Virginia, marriage certificate, not numbered. Put any other type of notation like that in square brackets. And then Elizabeth Show Mills outlines the third thing here as the certificate date. And she says to use the 4-digit year. However, be aware of certain instances where you are going to need to use the full date. And my example here for Pennsylvania County is one of those examples. Okay, so you cannot access the marriage certificates without the full marriage date. And so in this particular instance, I put the full marriage date in the source citation, even though Elizabeth Show Mills didn't say I had to. I already know because of having gone and gotten these records that that's what I'm going to need in order to get a copy from the clerk of the court's office. And then you just kind of follow through with the rest of the elements here through 4, 5, and 6. I tried to represent the punctuation as best I could, compare the 1 through 6 with the source citations on the left, and you'll start to get a better idea of what it's actually supposed to look like. Underneath the Pennsylvania County one, I also put one for a death certificate that did have a number, so you could start to see how that one plays out as well. Also be aware that if you are dealing with an unincorporated or with a city like Baltimore City or Danville or any other city that isn't a part of the county, you should put the city in the county spot, okay? So in the instance of Baltimore City and Baltimore County are two completely different geographic areas, all right? And so when I'm dealing with Baltimore City, that's what I have to put there, because if I put Baltimore County, that's a completely different place, and it's going to confuse people. And that's usually something you would only know if you were from that area, like my family is. And so be aware that those types of things can also change. So moving on to cemeteries. The cemetery citation is on Evidence Explained on page 213. And again, this is not for use with cemetery lists or cemetery indexes or websites like Find a Grave or something like that. This citation is not for that. This is a citation for an actual headstone in a cemetery or an interment site. So even if it was like a final resting place for ashes, like the little nooks or something like that that are in a cemetery or on a separate site, this citation is for that. It's not for indexes. There are different citations for different records like that. Look on pages 209 through 219 to find examples of those. You want to start with the cemetery name, comma, and then put the county and state in parentheses. As you see it here on the screen, you've got a semicolon here, and then you can put directions or GPS coordinates for the cemetery. If you use resources like Find a Grave or especially Billion Graves, Even if you go to Google Maps and try to get GPS coordinates as best you can for where the cemetery is, try to pick something close to the cemetery entrance. Um, you can put that information here in the parentheses. Um, highlight the item of interest, so the headstone of whoever the person is or whoever the people are. If you're looking at an image or if you took a picture and that is the specific thing that you're referencing here, that you went to the actual cemetery and you took a picture, you can put image information there, the date that you read or photographed the headstone. And so this represents a lot of information about an actual cemetery visit. That's, of course, your personal preference. And I have an example down here of a rural cemetery in Tennessee that I went to. You can see how I've laid it out with the punctuation, GPS coordinates. I got those off of Google Maps. I was able to go there, go to exactly to where I knew the cemetery was, just right click and click go to here, and then up inside the search box on Google Maps, it gives you the GPS coordinates, right? As I've been going around the internet, one of the things that I see a lot is that professional genealogists from lots of different places always recommend, if you're not used to doing source citations, to start practicing on census records. And I think that is a very piece of unhelpful information, and I'll explain to you why. But first, let me point out that in Evidence Explained, the page ranges for census records goes from 237 to 256. All right, so that is almost 20 pages of how to do census records. And this particular citation that I'm using is for an online database like Ancestry.com, if you were going to use that. Most people tend to use that or something like it, so that's the citation that I chose. But just keep in mind that there are tons of variations of census record citations, and that's why I think that piece of advice is so unhelpful, because the census citations change based on census year, they change based on format, they change based on the location of the records where you're getting them from, they change based on whether or not you got them online or offline, and they're very long citations. So I think that piece of advice is very not good. So just flip through that page range of Evidence Explained, figure out what format you got your census records from, and I would highly suggest basing your census citations on that more than anything else, is on the format that you got them in. And just to keep it straightforward, I did an 1850 census citation because that's what Elizabeth Shown Mills did in her book. But also keep in mind that these census details can change based on the census year, because the information that was included in the census changed as the census went on. And so keep in mind that even though this is an Ancestry.com census citation, this will probably still change based on the census that you're looking at. And so moving on, photos. Okay, I think photos are some of the most important things that you can do source citations for. Okay, I've got a picture here of my great-grandmother, Violet Nancy Green, and the reason that this is so important, especially in a situation like my family, I'm 24, but most of the older generation in my family, they're all still living. And since I'm the one that is digitizing a lot of the old photos and the old records and documents and things like that, I need to be able to keep straight in my mind who has what picture. Does my Aunt Shirley have them? Or does my grandmother have them in her photo collection? Does my grandmother have them in my great-grandmother's photo collection? Going back to Aunt Shirley, are they in my great-grandmother Callie's photo collection, but Aunt Shirley is the one who has them now? I have tons of older people in my family that are still living, and I made copies of their photos willy-nilly, but now if I had to go through them and actually figure out who has that original, I could do it for probably a large percentage of them, but there's a great percentage of them that I'm not going to be able to. I don't remember who has them. A trick that'll help you work through that is finding a picture that you do know where it comes from, right-click on it, and go to the image properties and check to see when the copy of the picture was taken or when it was copied. All right, so when it was created. And if you can compare that to the metadata from other images that you do know where they come from, you can start to get an idea of who the originals belong to. And so source citations are a really good idea on photos to keep track of who has the copies of which picture. Okay, and you can see the format here. I use the artifacts citation for photos. But the artifact citation can apply to lots of different things, and it can apply to photos, it can apply to photo albums and scrapbooks. If you'd rather do it that way as an entire album, a photo album, you can do that. If you have photocopies of obituary clippings but no idea what newspaper they come from, you can still cite those as obituary clippings using the artifact citation. So keep in mind that those obituary clippings and other little things like that, just because you don't know where they come from doesn't mean you can't cite them. Also keep in mind that dates on pictures, especially if they're printed in the little borders around the pictures, those are the dates they were developed, not necessarily the dates that they were taken. And so if you're going to use that as the date range, you can put developed on and then the date, or if they have the date written on the back, you can put the year. Put the information as clearly as you can so people know exactly what it is that you are putting there. Next thing, moving on, is books. Lots of different citations for books. They range on pages 646 to 651 in Evidence Explained. 1 through 6, again, gives you the basic format on how to do it. Keep in mind that for variations like multi-volume sets and other non-standard books like that, they are going to be on different page ranges. I've got an example here of a book that was not published by like a big fancy publisher. The guy who wrote it actually published it himself. And it is a family genealogy. He gave it away to different members of my family, and I actually have a first edition copy. And it looks like he kind of typed up all these pages on a typewriter himself and then had them bound together in a book. And so, you know, the page numbering is going to be really weird here. And so because of that, and because I've already tried to talk to different researchers in that part of Virginia, and they've been really confused about my page numbers from my book, they have second editions and later. So it will be important in the square brackets at the end of a citation sometimes to add notes about not only where you got the book from, but what edition the book is, and explanations of why some things in there could be a little funny. Since Genealogy from the Fruit of the Garden is a rare book, I put that it was a gift to my great-grandmother because it was. Doobie Toller sent it to her. She, in turn, gave it to my Aunt Shirley, who recently, before I moved, gave it to me. Okay, so I put that the book is in my possession at this point. Military records, they are not actually in the gray quick guides in Evidence Explained. You have to go to more of the inline explanations in 11.32 through 11.40 in Evidence Explained, and those are found on pages 595 through 606. Military records are a little bit tricky based on what record it is that you're looking at, like what type of record, and whether those are unit-based or whether those are person-based, and also what conflict it is. Okay, so this source right here that I'm making is for Civil War. I have a lot of Civil War people in my family, and I'm sure this changes slightly for World War I or World War II or anything like that, but since I figured a lot of the World War I and World War II service files have been destroyed, because of the fire in the National Personnel Record Center in Missouri, I figured that the most common military records that people would be looking at were Civil War records, and so that was the type of war record that I decided to represent here. I couldn't figure out exactly how I was supposed to cite a Civil War record, and I found a link. It's from a library or something. They made a page of quick source citation models and examples for different types of records, and this was the one that they created for Civil War records. It follows Evidence Explained and the same type of format that Elizabeth Shown Mills uses a lot, and I really, really liked it, so this is the one that I used, and put that up maybe in the show notes, in the doobly-doo on YouTube, the See More section. I'll try and remember to put it there. I got my service, the Confederate service files from Fold 3, and something important to keep in mind, and you see up here I said see Evidence Explained website for more details. One of the things that I learned from that was that the service files, so when you are going to Fold 3 and you're looking at the records and they have those little cards, those cards do not date back to the Civil War. Those cards were created as individual servicemen copies from original records. So those are actually derivatives, okay? And when you are citing those, it's important to keep that in mind. You're not actually, if you're looking at one of the cards and it says like POW muster roll or a regular muster roll or any other type of roll, that's not the actual record that you're citing there. You are citing the compiled service record. Okay, so that's not going to change based on what's on the card. The cards in general all make up a single compiled service record file for the individual soldier. And so you can just go ahead and cite the whole shebang, like all of the different cards in that collection together through one source citation based on the person. Okay, so you can see that I have the compiled service records of Confederate soldiers, blah, 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 blah. When you're on Fold 3 and you're looking at the actual card, if you open up the About page in the viewer on the left-hand side, or sometimes on the right-hand side, it will put a white bar and it explains to you all of the different source information that you can use to formulate a source citation. It doesn't actually give you the source citation, but it gives you the elements that you have to use in order to put the source citation together. So that's where I found that information. You see the URL here, date that I accessed it, James P. McKenzie is the guy's name, rank, you put the company first, and then the unit, and then at the end you put that you're citing the NARA microfilm publication, collection M324, roll 0756. Online database, the example on this page on page 382 are the different online databases that you can get at state archives, but you can really use any type of online database for this. I chose the Virginia Chronicle and keep in mind all of these different source citations are real things from my collection. And so I had a whole bunch of newspapers that I got from Chronicling America and the Virginia Chronicle about one of my ancestors who killed his wife. Okay, he's not my direct line ancestor. My direct line ancestor was being raised by him, and he was her uncle because her parents had died. Okay, and so I have tons of copies of newspapers from when James Nance killed his wife. And this one is a little bit Frankenstein together. All right, all of this part up until probably the part that says citing, all of that is just the regular citation for the online database. But because this citation was an online database citing a newspaper, when I got to the collection source, so if you look at up here it says collection source, I went ahead and used a standard citation for a print newspaper to include that information as the collection source. So this database was of a newspaper, but I also wanted to have all of the information in there about the database. So you can combine source citations together like that when it's the best way to represent how to find all of that information for the source, especially since in order to bring up this information in the Virginia Chronicle database, you need to know exactly what newspaper you're looking for. You have to know that information, so it's important to include that in the source citation. Finish up with newspapers. It was at this point that I realized that I've never actually used a print edition of a newspaper. I've always used either a microfilm copy of a newspaper or an online copy of a newspaper, but I've never actually used a real print newspaper. And that doesn't mean that the citation isn't important. You can see on the previous slide how I used the regular print citation in order to combine that together with an online database to find a regular image of a newspaper. And you can see how these two things compare. You've got the print edition citation on the left, and you've got the online archive citation on the right. The reason that I didn't use the online archive citation and use the online database one instead for that previous example is because the online archive citation doesn't provide enough information about the fact that I got that from a state archive. Okay, this is an example of something I got from the Maryland State Archive Special Collections, and because that one was easier to bring up, having the URL is simple enough. Just bringing this up, you don't really need as much of that newspaper information in order to find this, so I used the regular online archive citation for this. So again, even when you're trying to cite something from an online archive, based on the way the website is put together, the type of citation that you're going to use can change. All right. So that concludes our presentation. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share. And if you have requests for other presentations, leave them in the comments. And be sure to check out our blog at youngandsavvygenealogists.blogspot.com.